Section 16 of The Psychology of Peoples by Gustave Le Bon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Oxenhandler. Book 4, Chapter 2, General Conclusions. We have already remarked in the introduction to this work that it was merely a short summary, a sort of synthesis of the volumes we have devoted to the history of civilizations. Each of the chapters composing it should be regarded as the conclusion arrived at by anterior investigations. It is very difficult in consequence to still further condense ideas so condensed already. I shall attempt, however, for the benefit of readers whose time is precious, to present in the guise of very brief propositions the fundamental principles which represent the philosophy of this work. A race possesses psychological characteristics almost as fixed as its physical characteristics. Like the anatomic species, the psychological species is only transformed as the result of the accumulations of ages. To the fixed and hereditary psychological characteristics, whose association forms the mental constitution of a race, are adjoined, as in the case of all anatomic species, accessory elements created by diverse modifications of the environment. Being incessantly renewed, they endow a race with a certain measure of apparent variability. The mental constitution of a race represents not only the synthesis of the living beings which compose it, but more particularly that of all the ancestors who have contributed to its formation. It is not the living but the dead who play the preponderating role in the existence of a people. They are the creators of its morality and the unconscious sources of its conduct. The very great anatomic differences which distinguish the various human races are accompanied by not less considerable psychological differences. When only the average representatives of each race are compared, the mental differences often appear somewhat slight. They become immense as soon as the comparison is instituted between the most elevated elements of each race. It is then found that what more especially differentiates superior from inferior races is the fact that the former possess a certain number of highly developed minds, whereas the latter possess no such minds. The individuals of which inferior races are composed display a manifest equality between one another. In proportion as races rise in the scale of civilization, their members tend to become more and more differentiated. The inevitable effect of civilization is to differentiate individuals and races. In consequence, peoples are not progressing towards equality, but towards a growing inequality. The life of a people and all the manifestations of its civilization are merely the reflection of its soul, the visible signs of something invisible but very real. Exterior events are only the apparent surface of the hidden framework by which they are determined. It is neither chance nor exterior circumstances, and less still political institutions, that play the fundamental role in the history of a people. It is more especially the character of a people that fashions its destiny. The various elements of the civilization of a people being only the outward signs of its mental constitution, the expression of certain modes of feeling and thinking peculiar to a people, these elements cannot be transmitted unchanged to peoples of a different mental constitution. All that can be transmitted is the exterior, superficial, and unimportant forms. The profound differences existing between the mental constitutions of the various peoples result in these peoples viewing the world in very dissimilar lights. The consequence is that they feel, reason, and act in very different ways, and they therefore find, when they come in contact, that they are in disagreement on all questions. Most of the wars that take up so large a portion of history are the outcome of these dissentiments. Wars of conquest, wars of religion, wars of dynasties have always in reality been wars of races. An agglomeration of men of different origin do not form a race, do not possess, that is, a collective soul. until, as the result of interbreeding continued during centuries and of a similar existence under identical conditions, the agglomeration has acquired common sentiments, common interests, and common beliefs. Among civilized peoples there are scarcely any natural races, but only artificial races, created by historical conditions. Changes of environment only influence profoundly new races, that is, mixtures of old races whose ancestral characteristics have become dissociated by cross-breeding. Heredity is the only force powerful enough to struggle against heredity. Changes of environment have only a destructive action on races, the fixity of whose characteristics has not been affected by cross-breeding. An ancient race perishes rather than undergo the transformations requisite to enable it to adapt itself to a new environment. The acquisition of a solidly constituted collective soul marks the apogee of the greatness of a people. The dissociation of this soul always marks the hour of its decadence. The intervention of foreign elements constitutes one of the surest means of this dissociation being compassed. Like anatomic species, psychological species are subject to the action of time. They too are fated to grow old and die out. Always very slow in being formed, it is possible for them, on the contrary, to disappear rapidly. It suffices to trouble profoundly the functioning of their organs to cause them to undergo retrograde transformations whose consequence is often their prompt destruction. Peoples are centuries long in acquiring a certain mental constitution which they sometimes lose in a very short space of time. The ascending path which leads them to a high level of civilization is always very long, while the decline which leads them to decadence is most often very rapid. Together with character, ideas should be accounted one of the principal factors in the evolution of a civilization. They do not exert an influence until, after a very slow evolution, they have been transformed into sentiments and have come in consequence to form part of the character. They are then unaffected by argument and take a very long time to disappear. Each civilization is the outcome of a small number of universally accepted fundamental ideas. Religious ideas are among the most important of the guiding ideas of a civilization. The majority of historical events have been due indirectly to the variation of religious beliefs. The history of humanity has always run parallel to that of its gods. Such is the power of these children of our dreams, that even this name cannot be changed without the whole world being thrown at once into confusion. The birth of new gods has always marked the dawn of a new civilization, and their disappearance has always marked its decline. End of section 16. End of The Psychology of Peoples, Its Influence on Their Evolution, by Gustave Le Bon.